Hello, I'm Jeremy, Head Solutions Architect at Devtron. Today, we're going to be doing a bit of a platform walkthrough. And so whether you've just installed Devtron for the very first time, or you're getting started in a new role as a developer or platform engineer and trying to get your bearings on where everything's located, this video is for you. We're going to cover some of the most commonly used features, capabilities, and configurations so you can make the most of your Devtron experience. Let's log in and get started. Whenever you log in, you're brought to the applications page, but the first section we're going to look at is our global configurations. At first, we have a few organization-wide configurations like host URL for our dashboard, GitOps integrations, logical separations into projects, connecting additional clusters as well as environments for those clusters, configuring Git access, as well as attaching our container registries. So once these are configured, a next step would be to look at users and logins permissions. While you can create users individually here in the dashboard, what's usually recommended, especially for production environments, is to use one of these SSO services. You can connect via the SSO integration and assign those users permissions here in the permissions group section. Now, if we go into these, we can see that we can identify individual permissions to be granted via roles to different projects, environments, and even applications. We can do the same for Helm applications. We can even granularly assign permissions to individual Kubernetes resources to better be able to follow principles of least privilege while ensuring developers have access to everything that they need. Along those lines, speaking about developer self-service, let's head over to our chart store. So here you can see numerous open source charts that are available out of the box. These can easily be configured. You can look at preset values. You can deploy them to specific applications, specific projects, environments. You can look at previous versions of the chart and compare the differences. And then you can deploy that chart when ready. Now you can easily remove these. You can add an additional chart repository or multiple chart repositories, whether they're custom chart repositories that are private and you've built, or they're other public repositories. You can add them here in the configuration section. Going back to the chart store, we also have this concept of chart groups of Helm charts that typically are going to be deployed together for some purpose. For instance, let's say you spin up a brand new Kubernetes cluster and there's some things you need to set up before it's ready to start taking on applications and receiving traffic. So here we have our Kubernetes infrastructure chart group. This will configure Prometheus, metric server, as well as the cluster autoscaler to have that cluster ready to go. Again, any of these preset ones can be removed. Access can be granted per developer, per group, as well as per environment. Next, let's head over to our resource browser. This can be filtered up here across clusters, namespaces. You can actually create Kubernetes resources, pasting in YAML here and doing it manually, and view all of the resources in your cluster, ensure that things are running properly, and go right to the particular application if you need to debug something. Heading back to where we started in our applications page, let's go ahead and take a look at one of these applications. So what's great about Devtron's applications here is it's a single pane of glass where you have access as a developer, as an engineer, to everything that you might potentially need. We can go to the GitHub commits for the latest deployment. We can see the status of health checks running on this application, as well as the last deployment. We can view security vulnerabilities, application metrics, and all of the resources associated with our application. I can look at the containers running in my pod, look at logs for that application, and if I need to debug something, even open up a terminal into that container. In addition to that, we have this section called external links where you can quickly set up documentation for this particular app, maybe on-call information, subject matter experts to reach out to, as well as connecting Grafana and New Relic, Datadog, or any other application-specific information. This way, a new developer that's just been granted access to the applications that they're going to be in charge of can get to anything that they might need from this one page. We can also go to the Overview tab, where you can have short descriptions of the applications. You can have mandatory tags established via mandatory tag policies. So that way things like owners, the business unit that owns the project, contact information, all of that can be pushed here. Now let's go into the application's configuration. When creating an app, you'll first connect a Git repository and establish a build configuration. So you can set up the container registry and repository where that container, once that image is built, will be stored. If you have a Docker file already created, then you can identify it here. You can create one from an available template, or you can use Heroku build packs to auto-detect the language and build without a Docker file. Base deployment template. You can use our deployment templates or your own, but this is where you can configure some basic deployment parameters. Going into the workflow editor, this is where our CI/CD pipelines are defined. Now, for the build configuration, we did mention a container registry that we would be pushing the built image to. But what if you're already using another service for your CI? GitLab or Jenkins or Circle CI or something like that? Not a problem. Rather than having the CI process kicked off from within Devtron, you can have it triggered via a webhook whenever a new image is built wherever you're currently building and storing your images. That can then kick off either an automatic or a manual deployment stage, which you can then configure here within Devtron. So if we go into the build stage, we can see a few different options. We do have pre and post build stages where you can add tasks for different plugins. So let's say you want to implement load testing, SonarQube, dependency tracking. Any of these things can be easily configured right here in the build pipeline. Now within the build stage, you can set your source type. You can check this to allow Trivy to scan for vulnerabilities. You can choose to allow or not allow overrides of the registry images for this pipeline. Again, where you're storing the container image and where you're building it. And then whether that build is manual or automatic. Now, once that image is built and stored, or whether it's pulled from an external container repository, then we would define our deployment stages. Again, with deployment, we have pre and post deployment tasks that can be configured. So whether you want to add the results of the deployment to a Jira ticket and then close it out, or any other cleanup that you need to do, you can configure that here. And then within the deployment stage, we can have it automatic or manual. We can leverage GitOps or just a Helm deploy. And we can identify our deployment strategies. We support rolling, blue-green, canary, as well as manual approvals for that deployment. Anyone with the approver permission for this application and this environment will be able to approve. Once that's configured, we can actually go in here. I can manually select an image if I want to start a new build. Or let's say we want to roll back to a previous image. I can go here, look at my older images. Let's say I select this one here. What I'll get is a little warning saying that the configuration for this image is actually different as well. So I can go in here and review it. I can look at what the diff is. And then I can choose to deploy either with the last deployed configuration or with the one deployed with this image initially. As you can see here, I can have sequential pipelines that may be deployed in this case, to a pre-deployment staging environment, a staging environment, and then a prod environment. Or I can have parallel deployments that perhaps deploy to different clusters, perhaps even on different clouds. Going back to that individual configuration for those applications, external links. This is where documentation can be assigned, and it can be scoped to applications, environments, and clusters. So you can have perhaps a dashboard for everything within a cluster, apply to all applications within that cluster, whereas individual APM metrics would apply to a specific application. Both of those links can be added here. Mandatory tags, this can be defined here. And lastly, our plugin policies. So those pre and post build and deployment stage tools, if you have any third-party tools you're using, you can create those plugins or attach those plugins here and identify a policy. If you need a custom plugin created for a particular third-party product, you can submit an issue or a ticket, and we can look at building that out for you. But let's say I wanted to implement SonarQube. I would name my policy, enter a description. I can apply this to different applications, environments, or branches. I can say, for instance, let's only enforce this on all prod environments. I can allow it to run pre or post build, or let that be decided by the developer. And then I can set conditions if that policy is not adhered to. So I can block it outright, or I can allow the build to trigger, but to also show the user a warning. So let's say I want to give them a month to implement that. Then I can set that deadline, set a time when it'll go off, and that way they will get that warning until that time, at which point it will then be blocked. Well, that's it for our platform walkthrough of Devtron. Hope you enjoyed, hope you found this information valuable, and hope you have a great day.